walking the serpentine path, following the footsteps of the ancestors, walking the serpentine path, making our way back home. Hey ya, hey, hey ya, ho, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, ho, hey ya, hey, hey ya, ho. Following the serpentine path, Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Serpentine Path podcast. My name is Claire Wadiasid, and I am a student midwife, spiritual counselor, multidisciplinary artist, founder of Sage Femme Womb, and your guide on this serpentine path of life. Together, we'll dive deep into all things related to plant medicine, ancestral reconnection, intergenerational healing, womb sovereignty and bodily autonomy, rites of passage and initiation, time travel, shape-shifting, dimension hopping, the reclamation of our collective earth-based practices, and the ongoing, never-ending cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. Welcome to the serpentine path where the ancestors have called us back to. Let's start at the end and find our way back home together. All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Serpentine Path podcast. In today's episode, I'm going to be sharing a class excerpt from a new monthly series that I'm offering called the Women's Spiritual Anatomy series. Our first class was last night, and we were learning all about the magic of female perception and female consciousness, based specifically on the biological and spiritual gifts of our brains and our hormones. Now, the Women's Spiritual Anatomy series is a class that I've actually been developing for almost a year now, I think. And the way that it came to be that I was, living back home with my family for about 14 months. And one of my sisters is also at home with my parents. I have two younger sisters. And I was talking with my middle sister and just kind of asked her, what would you like to learn about your experience as a woman? And my sister is not involved in women's reproductive care. She is amazing and has many, many different gifts that she offers to the world, but she's not in the world that I'm in. And so I just asked her, what do you want to learn about the female experience, about your experience as a woman? And she said, I'd really love a biology class just to understand how my body works, but not a boring biology class that I had in middle school or high school, right? But a fun one that you would teach that would be magical and medicinal and interesting, And I was like, oh my gosh, that sounds super fun. So yeah, I really need to offer credit to my sister for being the inspiration for this series. Now, I had this series in my mind for a couple of months, and I was trying to figure out how I wanted to offer it. And then I got approached by an amazing woman and dear sister, Ashanti Cervantes, who has been on the podcast before. She is a family constellations facilitator. And she was also part of one of my offerings called the Red Tent back in February. There's going to be a September cohort coming up if you want to learn more about it. You can join my newsletter. The Red Tent is all about women's initiations and rites of passages and moving through the physiologic experiences of the female continuum to bring ourselves into our highest power, our highest truth, our deepest medicine that we can offer to our families, to our communities, to our projects. All the good stuff. So Ashanti was part of that first container of the Red Tent back in February. And she reached out to me and was just like, Claire, I am so obsessed with your work. I love learning from you, and I really want to bring you into my community here in Florida so that you can teach the women that I, come and circle up with every new moon. And so I got on the phone with her and the other woman who organizes things named Claudia, and I pitched them the Women's Spiritual Anatomy series. And they loved it. And they were like, yes, this is going to be awesome. So it's been in development over the past couple of months. Last night was our first class. It was absolutely amazing. The women who showed up were just like so on fire with this kind of stuff. It reminded me that women are just not taught about our bodies. We're not taught about our hormones. We're not taught about our cycle. We're not taught anything about the reproductive continuum, which is so painful. And there's a lot of rage that comes up, of course, but there's also so much beauty in coming together and being able to learn with one another and to feel at home in our bodies again. So this is going to be an excerpt from that first class. If you would like to join, the whole class series is $80 for the 8 months. That gives you access to all of the class replays. I'll give more information at the end about how you can join, but for now, let's get into class. Okay, welcome to the Women's Spiritual Anatomy series. Class 1, we're going to be talking all about female perception and consciousness, getting deep into the female brain and into the female hormones. So, very first thing we're going to talk about, super important, and I'll probably bring this up in like every class. What are biological mammalian roles? And when we think about this, I love to think about it with wolves, okay? So we have a papa wolf back here, we have a mama wolf here, a little wolf pup. What are these wolf roles, right? The biological mammalian roles, if we just think about wolves for now, okay? The female mammal, the mama wolf, her biological role is the continuation of the species by way of pregnancy, birth, and breastfeeding. Male mammal, what is a papa wolf's biological role? It's the survival of the species by way of resource provision and protection. So everything that he is doing in his life is in service to the well-being of Mama Wolf, because everything that she does in her life is in service to the well-being of little baby wolf, right? So that's what the design is going to look like. Baby wolf is relying 100% on Mama Wolf. Mama Wolf is relying 100% on Papa Wolf. That is what their biological roles are in order to continue the species forward. Now, what I really, really, really love to stress with women, this is like the most important thing that I want you to take away from the biological reality of womanhood, is this. Inherent biological value in nature equals the mammal who can reproduce and continue the species forward. This means that the only mammal in nature that has inherent biological value is the female. Males in nature do not have any biological value. They have to prove their value for their entire lives. So even if you are a female mammal who never has children from your own womb, regardless of not of whether you reproduce, it does not matter. The fact that you were born onto this earth with this gorgeous female body that has the capacity to reproduce and continue the species forward means that you are inherently valuable. It can never, ever be taken away from you, and you also do not need to prove that value. Again, whether or not you have children, you are equally as valuable as a female mammal. Now let's talk about this term territory. I'm going to talk about territory probably in every single class, and so I'll repeat it over and over again. But mammalian territory, again, if we're just thinking about wolves, what is the territory? Female territory is going to be everything internal, okay? So this is our body, this is our emotions, this is our relationships, our sexuality, and everything that has to do with reproduction. So this means that our territory eventually, if we have children, is going to be our children. Now, for a male mammal, his territory is completely external, okay? So it's going to be anything that is going to provide him resources for protection and provision. It's what he is responsible for tending to. If we're looking at this as humans, right? A male human, his territory is going to be his job, his home, his finances, his car, his land, his animals, his woman, and his children, right? So territory is what you are responsible for tending to and caring for, okay? Now things start to shift with territory and hormonal status, okay? So female territory is going to be internal only when a woman is moving through a cycle of ovulation. So if she is on hormonal contraceptives that stop her from ovulating, if she's pregnant, obviously she's not going to be ovulating. If she's breastfeeding and is still not ovulating, like in early child rearing years, and once she goes through menopause, her territory shifts to being external. Okay. Why would this be useful? Well, let's see. In pregnancy and in breastfeeding, for both of these, right? She is predominantly concerned with the well-being of vulnerable children, right? A baby inside of her belly or a baby at her breast. And so her territory is going to become much more external. She's focused on what is going to potentially be a threat to the life of my child, right? She's going to become much more focused on what is the home looking like? What is the outside world looking like? Are there threats? Are there things that are going to be dangerous that would potentially harm my body that is housing this child, or my body that is nourishing this child at my breast, and also my child itself, right? Naturally, a woman's territory becomes fully external around age 50. Okay, this is when we go through menopause. This is when we stop ovulating. This is often when a woman's truest, most powerful medicine starts coming online at age 50. Okay, you guys, menopausal women are like truly the medicine women of our cultures, of our societies. They are the ones that are tending to their external territory at this point because they have gone through this whole expanse of the reproductive journey. And then they get to a point after they've moved through menopause where they're no longer going to be reproducing, where they're looking out at their family, at their community, and they're saying, wow, I see so clearly because I've seen it all from an internal perspective of what my body went through. And now I'm seeing it from an external perspective of what my people need, right? Now, male territory is super interesting because it's going to be external depending on their testosterone levels. So when a man is struggling with low testosterone levels, a lot of the time, if a man is struggling with like a lot of depression, his territory will sometimes become more internal, okay? What this means is that with the brain, the right side of the brain is where our testosterone is developed. The left side of the brain is where our estrogen is developed. And so depending on what your hormonal status is, that determines how you're seeing the world. If you're looking at it from the right side, more testosterone dominant, it's going to be external. If you're looking at it from the left side of the brain, it's going to be internal. It's estrogen, right? So when a man has lower testosterone levels and higher estrogen levels, his territory is going to shift to being internal. Now, for men in their reproductive years, we want them to have high testosterone levels. We want them to be seeing the world from the right side of our brain. We want them to have an external territory. Naturally, a man's testosterone levels are going to start dropping around age 35. Very, 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 very gradually. Around 35, they start dropping. By the time he's age 70, his testosterone levels are going to shift so drastically that he's naturally going to become left brain dominant, estrogen dominant, and his territory is going to be more of an internal nature. So our perception of what's the most important thing to us changes throughout our lives, changes throughout the reproductive continuum, and changes throughout all of these, for women in particular, internal initiatory states of menstruation, of pregnancy, of breastfeeding, postpartum, and then menopause. Okay, let's talk about the 4 phases of womanhood. And I want to give credit to one of my teachers, Maura Flynn from the Holy Well, for offering me this specific framework and perspective. So, the first phase of womanhood that we all experience is going to be our girlhood years, right? And this is usually going to span from our birth until our very first bleed. On average, this would look like 0 to age 13, right? And what a little girl child is experiencing from, birth until age 13 or, whenever she gets her first bleed is an experience of being one with her mother. And what that means is that her nervous system is completely dependent upon her mother's nervous system for co-regulation, right? And so what this means essentially is that like a mother's body is a baby's first ecosystem, right? It's the only thing that a baby knows truly because it was grown from the bones, from the marrow, from the fat of a mother. The first sound that it ever heard was its mother's heartbeat. And so, as small babies, our entire world is based on what our nervous system regulation looks like with our mother. So, we are experiencing this reality of being the same as our mom from the moment that we're conceived in our womb all the way up into our bleed. We're going through this process of me and my mom are the same. And slowly, slowly, but surely, I'm starting to come into my own sense of individuation. And that usually doesn't actually hit until she gets her bleed. Now, what's also happening with a little girl child from birth to her first bleed is this experience of I belong to my father. My father is responsible for my well-being, for my safety, for my protection, for my provision, right? Me and my mother are the same, and I belong to my dad. And ideally, right, within an intact family, within an intact culture where families are deeply supported intergenerationally, ideally, the experience is going to be it feels good to belong to my father. And it feels good to be the same as my mother. That is what we ideally want for all little girl children is to have this experience of being the same as my mom is great and I love it. And belonging to my dad is great and I love it. That's obviously not always the reality, but that's what the divine design would look like. The next phase of womanhood that we move into is going to be our maidenhood. And it's going to start at our first bleed and it goes up until we have our first child. Now, within most intact cultures around the world, I didn't share this in the beginning, but so I lived in the Colombian jungle for a full year and a half. I've been going back and forth over the past 5 years. I was spiritually adopted by my 2 elders there through the process of their dying years. I helped midwife them through their deaths, which is how I essentially became a part of their family. And the peoples that I learned under were predominantly the Cofan people of Bajo Putumayo, Colombia. It's on the border of Ecuador and Colombia. And then my spiritual grandmother, she was of the Muroi people. So a lot of my understanding of what reproduction looks like in an intact culture came from my time learning and living in the jungle full time. So oftentimes a woman in an intact culture is not going to start having children ideally until around 25. The reason for this is because it takes until 25 for the ovaries to be finally done developing. The female reproductive system doesn't finish developing until around age 25, okay? And so what is a woman experiencing from the time that her reproductive system starts to really come online during her first bleed? And then, kind of solidifies at 25. What she's learning is how to individuate from her mother. How do I become my own person? And then how do I learn how to belong to myself? What does self-belonging feel like to me, right? Remember, before she was the same as her mother and she belonged to her father. Now the goal, right, is I want to know who I am as a person. I don't want to be my mom anymore. I want to know who I am as an individual. And I want to know what it feels like to belong to me. It felt really good to belong to my father. And now I'm going to see and make sure that it feels just as good to belong to myself. Okay. Now, from 13 to 25, if we were to look at like a non-patriarchal, non-religious version of protecting a woman's virginity, what that would be about would be one, protecting her sexual development, right? So that she doesn't end up having children when she is like fairly young and doesn't do damage to her skeletal development and to the development of her ovaries and her uterus, her fallopian tubes, everything like that, right? What it's also protecting is a woman's process of learning how to develop a really strong internal masculine, right? She's shifting from the masculine protector always being her father to now being her own internal masculine protector. That's what we would be protecting when we're saying, okay, we would ideally want a woman to just be able to fully know who she is and fully belong to herself and know how good that feels in her body, know how good that feels in her heart before she ends up becoming sexually active, right? Or before she ends up ideally like getting pregnant, right? Now, the next phase that we have is going to be our motherhood years, right? And so this is going to be from our first child until our very last bleed, right? So roughly we're looking at like the years of age 25 to age 50, right? These are going to be like the beginnings and ends of our reproductive years. Now, what's being experienced in this moment, this time, is an experience of reunion, right? So we remember that as a little girl child, we were in union with our mother. Now we're choosing reunion through sex and through childbirth and breastfeeding. So, what reunion is going to look like now is I've chosen to belong myself to a man where it feels just as good, if not better, to belong to him as it did to belong to myself and as it did to belong to my father. That's ideally how we're choosing male partners, okay? Now, the other side of it, she's experiencing union, and this is going to be oneness with her children, but now she's the one who is going to be the protector and provider of her child in the way that she got to experience that when she was a little baby with her mother, right? And so there's a shift in responsibility. This is also a shift in territory for her, right? Up until this point, up until motherhood, her territory has been entirely internal. Now, when she has a child, it's both internal and it's external. My baby is here with me and it's close and it's my territory. I'm responsible for its protection, for its well-being, for its safety, right? And then the next phase that we move into is going to be our matriarch years, right? And this is what our experience is during menopause and beyond. So this is on average age 50 and up. And again, it's a big process of re-individuation. Your children don't need you so much anymore. You're figuring out, okay, who am I? What are my dreams? What are my goals? What are my visions? What is my medicine? What do I want to pour out into the world? She's also renegotiating what belonging looks like, right? This will often be a time, right, when we're looking at like the perimenopausal and menopausal years. These are times when women are really, really asking themselves, does it still feel good to belong myself to this man? Do I want to self-belong? Do I want to belong to a different career? Do I want to belong to a different life path? Do I want to belong to a different home? Like all these questions of belonging are really, really big for a woman because her territory is also shifting to external at this point in time because she's not ovulating anymore. Now, what I love to always talk about with the matriarch, right, is that the matriarch within her community is the keeper of death, the keeper of rebirth. She's the community oracle and she's the community orienter. This time in a woman's life is our most powerful time, menopause and beyond. Within the Kofan tradition and within many indigenous intact cultures, women do not actually start serving medicine and working as healers until after they've gone through menopause. And the reason for that is because it's essentially the time of their lives where they're able to say, I've gone through every single one of my initiations. This was my last initiation, right? Menopause, coming into my non-reproductive, non-bleeding years. That is when a woman, in the Kofan tradition at least, starts to actually serve medicine and do ceremonies and be seen as a healer in her community. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the connection between the moon and the womb. So, our average menstrual cycle is 28 days in length, which is the exact average moon cycle, right? And I also want to clarify, menstrual cycles can change in length. Anywhere between like 24 days to 38 days would technically be considered normal. But what we're looking at on average is that it's going to be around 28 days, just like the moon, right? Now, as women, our menstrual cycle, it emulates and it's informed by all the phases of nature, right? I like to refer to this as the laws of nature. This is what my elders taught me. Understanding what the laws of nature look like. And the most basic laws of nature is that birth, life, death, and rebirth are always going to be cycling in that way. And we hold all of that inside of our bodies, inside of our wombs, throughout our menstrual years, right? The years that we're bleeding, but throughout the entirety of our expanse of womanhood. And what we're going to see as we move forward into understanding all the phases of the menstrual cycle is that each phase of womanhood can also be tapped into during each phase of the menstrual cycle. It's like a time traveling device, and you'll understand more as I break it down. Now, what I love, love, love about the female body and about the womb is that every month our bodies are moving through their own waxing and waning processes, right? Their internal transformations and external transformations that are mirroring both the moon, which is like the lunar rhythms, right? Of that 28-day cycle. And then also the seasons, right? And so I love to look at the different phases of our menstrual years and our entire expanse of womanhood through the lens also of the cycles, right? This is a pretty common one that people talk about often. All right, so let's get into lots of talk about hormones. We got the 4 phases of the menstrual cycle, okay? Starting here at day 1, this is going to be the first day of our bleed. The first day of our bleed is the first day that we have like actual heavy flow. It's not going to be considered days that you just have maybe like that early spotting. If you're a woman who has like kind of brown spotting maybe at the beginning that lasts like a day or two, that's not the first day of your bleed. Day 1 of your bleed is going to be that nice heavy flow that comes through. Menstrual cycle sometimes will last from like 1 to 7 days, right? On average, it's usually around 3 to 6 or 7 days. After that, we move into our follicular phase. The dominant hormone during this time is going to be estrogen that's rising, okay? It starts off low and then it rises, rises, rises. As it's rising, we're going to see follicle stimulating hormone, we're going to see luteinizing hormone, and we're going to see testosterone all start to peak in the middle of our cycle, which is going to be ovulation. Then luteinizing hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, estrogen, they all drop off. And progesterone starts taking the lead on the second half of our cycle, right? And so it's going to build up, it's going to reach its peak about midway through. Estrogen is going to drop, and then it's also going to build like a smaller little peak about halfway through. And then after that, if there is no implantation of a fertilized egg inside of our uterine lining, then the hormones are going to drop off. And this significant drop of hormones is what's going to cause our bleed. So we're going to revisit this graph a couple of different times throughout. But this is like the beautiful natural dance that our hormones are going through every single month. Now, what I really, really love about the menstrual cycle is that it shows that women ourselves are the keepers of long time because we are so connected to the moon, right? In Latin, the word for month is the word mensis, which is the exact same spelling except for one letter of menses, right? What we would refer to often as our bleed, our menstruation. The word in Latin mensis is a direct connection to the word moon, right? And so the root word of both the month and the bleed and the moon are all three the same word in the Latin language, right? In in Colombia, in the jungle where I lived, when I would say, I'm on my period, the way that I would say that is yo estoy con la luna, which means I am with the moon, or tengo mi luna, I have my moon, right? My bleed, I always just refer to as my moon time, right? And that's normal. What I also love is that I remember when I was probably 21 years old or 20 years old, I was living in Italy. I was a professional dancer in a past life, and so I was dancing at a festival, and there was this amazing, gigantic what's the word? Reconfiguration of an old bone that archaeologists had found from like thousands and thousands of years ago, and there were exactly 28 notches on the bone. And they were trying to figure out, what is this bone for? Why is this bone so important? Why does it have only 28 notches? And they couldn't figure it out. And finally, it was a woman who said, well, there's usually 28 days in a menstrual cycle. And so we see that women from the beginning of time have been using our moon time, our bleed, our menstrual cycle to tell what time was actually passing. Because if we're just going off of men and their 24-hour cycle with the sun, time doesn't really exist, right? It's just like, oh, every day, same 24 hours, do to do, do to do. For women with this beautiful 28-day long cycle, right? They were able to say to their communities, a whole month time has passed. They were also able to say, this is when we're fertile. This is when we're not fertile. This is when we can plant the seeds. This is when we can harvest. So women are the keepers of long time. And that is literally built into the design of our bodies. Okay, let's get into menstruation. So, the first phase of our menstrual cycle that we are going to look at is going to be menstruation, right? Our bleed. The moon phase that this is going to be connected to is the new moon. The season is going to be winter time. The phase of womanhood is our elder matriarch, our elder crone, our wise woman. The cervical fluids that we're going to be seeing are blood and bloody discharge. It's going to begin on the first day of our bleed and can continue anywhere for 3 to 7 days in a healthy cycle. And what's super interesting, the associated phase of pregnancy that menstruation is like the microdose of is going to be postpartum. So the version of you that you are when you're menstruating is going to be most similar to the version of you that you are postpartum and the version of you that you're going to be in the future as an elder matriarch. So anytime that you want to do any kind of time travel work and start to figure out, what can I see forward and what can I see back, your menstruation time is going to give you a clue as to what kind of wise woman you're going to be and what your postpartum time is going to look like, right? Now let's talk about blood and hormones. What's going on, right, when we're bleeding? So, bleeding when we're menstruating is prompted by that really sharp drop off in the hormone levels that we saw, right? So it's a big drop in the hormones, and it's also the shedding of the uterine lining. That is what is growing throughout the entirety of our luteal phase, which we'll get to. And then it has to go somewhere, right? And so the heavier that your bleed is, the thicker of a uterine lining you know that your body is growing, right? Which is why, when women have like a really, really light bleed, what we see with that is they probably don't have enough progesterone during their luteal phase to build up a thick enough lining for a fertilized egg to actually implant into their uterine lining. Okay, so we don't want to have like super, super heavy bleeding. We also don't want to have like super, super light bleeding. We want to have a nice, strong flow because that's going to tell us what's going on with our uterine lining because that's what's being bled out. Now, the first 1 to 3 days of our bleed are usually our heaviest bleeding days, right? Those are also a time where everything is going to feel really, really heightened, right? The physical, the emotional, the mental, the spiritual sensitivity is going to be quite extreme. And this is when we have our lowest energy of our entire cycle because our hormone levels are so low. Now, usually in the first 1 to 3 days, this is most often where any kind of menstrual dis-ease is going to be the most prevalent, right? Cramps, low back pain, nausea, breast tenderness and swelling, headaches, all of that kind of stuff, right? Notice how I said they're the most prevalent. It's common to have menstrual dis-ease. It's not normal. Our menstrual cycles are not designed to be painful. When our hormones are in balance, our menstrual cycle is meant to be quite painless and quite honestly, like enjoyable in many ways. The reason why is because our body has to produce oxytocin in order to start the uterine contractions that will shed our uterine lining. And so technically, when we're on our bleed, we are producing high levels of oxytocin. This is why it's partially an altered state of consciousness, right? It's the same thing in birth. For a natural physiologic birth, the female body has to be in this positive feedback loop of releasing oxytocin through the body, which then creates more uterine cramping, which then pushes a baby down into the cervix, which then sends signals up to the brain to produce more and more oxytocin, right? So what's happening with our bleed, and I'll talk about this in the next slide, is an altered state of consciousness for more than one reasons, but oxytocin is a big part of it. Now, throughout our bleed, estrogen is going to start to rise again, usually around like day 3 or 4. And this is when we just slowly start to feel a subtle boost of like more energy, more mood, more optimism. And our bleed starts to kind of like taper off, get a little bit lighter, and we slowly start to feel like we can come out of our cave. It's slow and it's meant to be slow, right? If we think about this with postpartum, and a woman, usually is going to be for at least the first 6 weeks, always recommended to be staying in bed and just resting. She's usually going to be bleeding for the first couple of weeks and it's going to get lighter and lighter and lighter and lighter. Now, if you look at that 6 weeks of postpartum versus 6 days of her bleed, usually by the time that you're at day 6, your bleed is very, very light or you're not bleeding anymore, right? And so each day of your bleed can show you what each week of postpartum is going to look like for you, right? It's like a little microcosm of the macrocosm. All right, so blood ceremonies and altered states. I love talking about altered states of consciousness. I've been navigating altered states of consciousness probably since I was pretty young in various different worlds, right? So when I was living in the jungle with the Kofan people, traditionally, you do not go into any kind of ceremonies, any kind of plant medicine ceremonies, when you are on your bleed as a woman. The reason for that is because they view the woman's bleed time as a ceremony and as an altered state of consciousness in itself. And that's not just like a spiritual woo-woo thing. That's like a literal, actual thing, right? We talked about the oxytocin. Now we're going to talk about the corpus callosum. Okay, so the corpus callosum is the bundle of nerves that separates the two sides of our brain, the right and left side of our brain. Okay, when we are bleeding, both during menstruation and during postpartum, our corpus callosum literally dissolves. You guys, this is so cool and so crazy. It literally dissolves. This means that both hemispheres of our brain are working together at the exact same time, every single time we're bleeding every month, and also in the postpartum. This is what I mean when I say that your menstrual cycle is literally an altered state of consciousness, like a very strong altered state of consciousness. when I was in the jungle and I was not distracted by like any aspects of the Western world, I would get to a point with my menstrual cycle every single month where I was like extremely spiritually tapped in, right? My dreams, my visions, my intuitive knowing was so easily accessible and tapped into, to the point where I had to start learning how to like really shield and maintain like good energetic hygiene and protection around myself, right? Because I would literally start like hearing people's thoughts and I would hear what they were saying. And then later in the day, I would see them and they would say the exact words to me that I had been hearing all day coming from them. Okay. So when we are not in this crazy modernized, westernized, industrialized world, women during this time would go off, be with other women in some kind of moon lodge or red tent situation, and they would be dreaming and visioning and receiving intuitive knowledge about what was necessary for themselves, for their family, for their community, and for the land and waters that they were the stewards of, right? So when we're bleeding, it's both a process of deep release, physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, and relational experiences that we've gone through over the whole past month. But it's also a time of what are we receiving about the truth of our peoples, right? About my truth, about my family's truth, about my community's truth, and about the ecological truth of the land and the waters. And then they would come back out from that ceremony. They would traditionally go to their elders and they would say, this is what we saw, right? And so women, bleeding women, both women who are bleeding with their menstruation and women who are bleeding postpartum, are truly the most tapped in people on planet Earth. Okay. Pregnant women and bleeding women, the most tapped in because of that altered state of consciousness. All right, if you love what you are hearing, I would love to invite you to join us in the Women's Spiritual Anatomy series. It's an 8-month live class journey exploring the biological, emotional, relational, and spiritual dimensions of the female body. The full class series is available for $80, which gives you lifetime access to all 8 of the class replays. Our next class of the series is going to be on Thursday, August 27th, where we will explore the topic of female receptivity and relationality by learning all about the vulva and the vagina. The links will be in the show notes for you to join. Thank you so much. Ciao, ciao.